The story of the Great Flood stretches across continents and cultures, echoing through time like a relentless tide. It speaks of waters rising, of cities swallowed, of a world cleansed in liquid fire. But what if the flood was never about water? What if the deluge was a veilless symbol of a deeper unraveling far beyond rivers and rain? Across ancient tablets and sacred scrolls, the flood emerges not just as a catastrophe, but as a cosmic rupture, a moment when reality itself shuddered. In Sumerian texts, the waters are described as the fury of gods, not merely liquid but rage made manifest. In Indian lore, the Great Flood washes away the old yuga sagas of decline, ushering in cycles anew. In the Bible, the waters cover the earth, erasing wickedness and preparing the ground for rebirth. All share one truth: the flood was a transformation, a breaking down of the known to make way for the unknown. Water, in myth, is never just water. It is the boundary between worlds, the veil between life and death, order and chaos, consciousness and the unconscious. The flood washes over more than land. It floods the mind, it submerges the soul. It drowns the old stories, the old ways of being, the old understandings. What remains after the waters recede is not simply dry earth, but a changed world, a changed self. Perhaps the flood is less a historical event and more a metaphor for profound shifts in reality. For moments when everything we hold as certain is swept away by forces beyond our control. When the waters rise not from sky or sea, but from the depths of collective fear, from tectonic shifts in consciousness. When the flood is the rising tide of new paradigms drowning the old. And in this reading, the flood becomes a map not of destruction, but of transformation. A story etched into the psyche of humanity, reminding us that every ending is also a beginning. That beneath the waters of chaos lies the possibility of renewal. The Great Flood was never just water. It was a cleansing of worlds, an unmaking of reality as it was, so that it might be made new. And this story lives on, in our myths, in our dreams, in the collective memory of a world that has always been flooded by forces seen and unseen. The flood waters rise again, not in rivers or rain, but in shifts of perception, in the tides of energy, in the currents of spirit. And as they rise, they ask us, what are you willing to let go? What old world will you allow to drown so that something new may be born? The flood is not just a story of loss. It is a call to transformation, a reminder that beneath the waters, life waits, waiting for the courage to surface. Water has always been more than a physical substance. It is the language of the unconscious, the mirror of the soul, the river in which time flows and memory swims. In myths and ancient symbolism, water often embodies the realm beneath the surface, the deep, dark, uncharted territories of the mind and spirit. It is the vast reservoir of emotion, intuition, and mystery. When ancient storytellers spoke of a great flood, they were not merely describing rising waters covering the earth, but the overwhelming surge of these hidden depths breaking through the boundaries of the known. The flood is, first and foremost, a metaphor for the deluge of consciousness, a rising tide of unseen forces within the collective and individual psyche. Your mind is layered like the ocean. There are calm surfaces and turbulent depths, hidden currents and shifting tides. Most of the time, the conscious self navigates the surface, moving between moments, tasks, and thoughts. But the unconscious is always there beneath, shaping, pulling, waiting. Sometimes, the unconscious rises in dreams, in crises, in moments of overwhelming emotion, and the floodwaters break through the levees of reason and control. This internal flood reflects the mythic waters that ancient cultures wrote about. It is chaos made manifest, but also a necessary cleansing. The floodwaters wash away the sediment of old beliefs, toxic patterns, fears, and illusions that cloud perception. They dismantle rigid identities and dissolve false certainties. In this dissolution, there is both loss and possibility. The myth of the flood tells us that before rebirth, there is dissolution. Before the new can emerge, the old must be cleansed. Water is the primal element of transformation. It erodes the old and nourishes the new. Many spiritual traditions understand this deeply. In Christian baptism, water is the symbol of death and rebirth, washing away sin, ignorance, and rebirth into new life. In Hinduism, the rivers are sacred, carrying prayers and purifications, washing away karma and allowing for spiritual renewal. In Taoism, water is the ultimate symbol of flow, yielding, and transformation, soft but unstoppable, shaping the hardest rock. The flood is not simply a story of destruction, but the cosmic washing of the slate, the resetting of cycles, the clearing of consciousness to allow for awakening. Psychologically, it parallels moments of emotional overwhelm, where the mind is flooded by feelings too vast to contain. These moments often precede profound change. When you feel flooded, whether by grief, fear, or ecstasy, know that you are moving through a rite of passage. You are crossing the waters of transformation. The flood reminds us that the depths are not to be feared, but to be respected. For beneath the chaos lies the fertile bed of renewal. The waters carry memory, the collective and the personal. They hold the traces of all that has been, all that will be. And as the waters recede, they leave behind new land, new ground upon which life can grow. The flood is an invitation, a call to dive beneath the surface of your own consciousness, to face the vast, mysterious waters within, and to emerge transformed. Because water is life. Water is memory. Water is the endless dance between destruction and creation. The Great Flood was never just about water. It was a journey into the depths of being, a passage through the unconscious tides, a cosmic cleansing that echoes through time, inviting us all to awaken to the flowing waters within. The story of a great flood is one of the most universal myths in human history, from the mountains of the Andes to the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, from the islands of the Pacific to the vast river valleys of China. The flood narrative echoes across cultures, languages, and epochs. Each tells of waters rising, swallowing lands, erasing civilizations, wiping clean the slate of existence. But beneath this common narrative lies a tapestry of differences, variations that reveal how each culture perceived the flood and what it truly meant to them. In Mesopotamia, one of the oldest recorded flood stories appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh. There, the hero Utnapishtim is warned by the god Ea to build a great boat to save himself, his family, and the seeds of life from a divine deluge meant to punish humanity. This tale shares striking similarities with the biblical story of Noah, yet its nuances reflect a different worldview, one where gods are capricious and humans caught in their whims. In the Indian tradition, the flood appears in the story of Manu, the first man who survives a cosmic flood with the help of the god Vishnu in the form of a fish. Here, the flood symbolizes the cyclical destruction and creation of the universe, a cleansing of the old yuga, age, and the dawning of a new era. It is less about punishment and more about cosmic rhythm. The Greeks tell of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survive a great flood sent by Zeus to wipe out the wickedness of humankind. Their story echoes themes of renewal and repopulation, casting stones that become humans, symbolizing creation from destruction. Chinese flood myths often involve the hero Yu, who controls the waters by taming the rivers rather than destroying them. Yu's tale emphasizes mastery, balance, and transformation rather than sheer destruction. Indigenous peoples of the Americas also carry their own flood stories. The Hopi speak of a time when floods cleansed the earth, leading to the emergence of a new world beneath the waters. For many tribes, water is a sacred element of renewal, and flood narratives carry spiritual and ecological meanings. What these stories share beyond water rising is a common thread of transformation. The flood is less about a physical event and more about a transition, the end of one world, the beginning of another. This transformation is not merely external but deeply internal. The flood washes away ignorance, fear, corruption, allowing for rebirth, enlightenment, and renewal. These myths also hint that the flood was not always just water. Some describe fiery rains, others speak of darkness covering the sun, and some tell of great winds and earth trembling. The flood is a cosmic upheaval, an elemental storm disrupting the order of things, not simply a rise in sea levels. It is a story encoded in many layers: natural, spiritual, psychological. Across the cultures, the flood myth serves as a mirror, reflecting human experiences of catastrophe and hope, destruction and creation, fear and renewal. And through these narratives, we glimpse the collective memory of humanity, a memory of cycles, of cosmic rhythms, and of the enduring power of transformation. As we move forward, we will uncover how this flood may have been not water, but an energy shift, a frequency change that reshaped the very fabric of reality. But before that, it is vital to honor the stories, to listen to the voices of ancient peoples who carried this myth not as mere legend, but as sacred truth encoded in their souls. The Great Flood, as told through myth and scripture, is often pictured as a literal inundación, a catastrophic surge of water swallowing the earth. But what if this widespread story, echoed across civilizations and epochs, describes something far more profound? Something not bound to physical water at all, but to invisible currents, energies, and frequencies shaping reality itself. Water, in its symbolism, has always been more than a liquid. It represents the flow of consciousness, the tides of emotion, and the pulse of existence. The flood may have been an allegory for a massive shift in the energetic fabric of the world, cosmic wave washing over human perception, civilization, and consciousness. Modern science tells us that Earth vibrates with electromagnetic frequencies. These subtle fields affect all living beings, their consciousness, and the environment. When these frequencies change through solar activity, geomagnetic shifts, or cosmic events, they ripple through the biosphere, altering DNA, mental states, and collective awareness. The ancient flood stories could be encoding memories of such energetic upheavals, not water rising from rivers, but a flood of energy flooding the planet, disrupting structures, changing the course of evolution. Consider the idea of a frequency shift, a global wave that raises or lowers the vibrational state of life on Earth. This energetic flood could have dismantled previous ways of thinking and being, sweeping away entire civilizations or resetting the spiritual climate. The survivors, whether individuals, families, or groups, became the bearers of a new consciousness, adapted to altered vibrational states. Such a shift might manifest in the physical world as natural disaster, storms, quakes, floods, because matter responds to energy. But these are side effects, not causes. The true flood was energetic, invisible, yet transformative. The ark, in this context, is more than a physical vessel. It symbolizes a containment of consciousness, a sanctuary, preserving knowledge, spirit, or a higher vibration through the chaos of the flood. This interpretation resonates with descriptions of solar flares, magnetic pole shifts, and ancient records of cosmic events that have profoundly impacted Earth. When the planet's electromagnetic field fluctuates dramatically, life experiences turmoil, societies collapse, memories fade, myths are born. The flood story as an energy event reframes ancient catastrophe not as punishment or mere natural disaster, but as a cosmic recalibration, a cleansing of outdated patterns, frequencies, and collective programs. It challenges us to rethink history not as linear progression, but as cycles of energetic ascent and collapse. When the waters rise, it is consciousness itself that floods, washing away the old self, the old world, and forcing emergence into new states. Our ancestors may have encoded this deep truth into the flood myths, knowing that words and stories were the only vessels capable of carrying such immense memory across time. Today, as our planet and consciousness undergo shifts once again, the ancient flood reminds us of the power and inevitability of transformation. The floodwaters may no longer be literal, but the currents beneath them surge ever stronger. And we must learn to navigate these tides not as victims, but as awakened travelers on the great river of change. Before the flood, there was a world vibrant, thriving, and filled with knowledge. Ancient texts speak of civilizations that rose to great heights, mastering arts, sciences, and mysteries beyond our understanding today. These societies built monumental structures aligned with stars, developed complex systems of writing, and held wisdom about the cosmos and consciousness. But then came the flood, not merely a rise in waters, but a tidal wave of change that swept through the foundations of existence. Old worlds were washed away, their knowledge buried or lost, their people scattered or transformed. What caused this collapse? In myth, it is often portrayed as divine wrath or cosmic judgment. Yet, beneath the symbolism lies a deeper truth, a transformation so profound that entire modes of being could no longer continue. Civilizations before the flood operated within a frequency, a state of consciousness that allowed certain abilities and ways of living. This vibrational state was tied to the planet's energy matrix and cosmic cycles. When the flood, a shift in energy and frequency occurred, this matrix was altered. The consequences were immense. Knowledge systems were fragmented, languages changed, technologies faded into myth. The connection between humanity and the divine became obscured. Survivors of the flood, whether literal or symbolic, became the founders of new societies. They carried remnants of the old wisdom, hidden in stories, rituals, and symbols. These fragments formed the seed for future civilizations, but much was lost in the transition. Archaeology shows sudden cultural shifts and gaps in the historical record around times that could correspond to these flood events. Lost cities beneath the seas, submerged structures, and abrupt changes in settlement patterns hint at massive disruptions. But it is not just physical evidence that tells the story. The transformation after the flood was also psychological and spiritual. The collective consciousness had been reset. Old identities dissolved. Fear and trauma were embedded into the human psyche. A veil descended over humanity's understanding of itself and the universe. From this veil, new religions, myths, and social structures arose, attempts to explain, contain, and adapt to the changed reality. The flood marks a profound rupture, the death of one world and the birth of another. And this process is not unique to ancient times. History is punctuated by cycles of collapse and rebirth. Cultures rise, flourish, then are swept away sometimes by natural disasters, sometimes by the tides of change in consciousness. In our own era, many feel the weight of such a flood approaching again, not of waters, but of information, technology, social upheaval, and environmental crisis. The myth of the flood serves as a mirror, reflecting the truth that transformation is inevitable and often turbulent. It invites us to learn from the past, to seek the wisdom hidden beneath the chaos, and to prepare ourselves not merely to survive, but to awaken into a new state of being. Because the story of civilization before and after the flood is ultimately the story of humanity's journey through transformation, a journey that continues today. The Ark, a vessel amidst the rising chaos, a refuge in the flood, a sanctuary between worlds. Across countless flood myths, the Ark appears not merely as a boat or physical container, but as a profound symbol of preservation and transformation. It is the safe harbor amidst the overwhelming tide, not only preserving life, but the essence of life itself. But what, exactly, was the Ark? Was it just a wooden ship, or something far more complex? The answer lies in its symbolism and the role it plays in myth and psyche. The Ark is a vessel of consciousness, a container for the seed of continuity, wisdom, and rebirth. It is the space where the old self dissolves and the new self begins to form. Think of it as a womb, dark, enclosed, protected. Within it, life is sheltered from destruction, allowed to gestate and grow until it can emerge into a transformed world. The Ark carries more than just people and animals. It carries knowledge, memory, spirit, the blueprint of life, the code of survival beyond the flood. In many traditions, the Ark is described as a place of divine instruction, a holy sanctuary where the survivor is guided by the gods, learning the ways of the new age to come. It is also an inner practice. The journey of navigating the flood is not only external, it is deeply internal. The floodwaters mirror the floods of emotion, fear, and uncertainty within the soul. To survive the flood means to enter your own ark, to find that inner sanctuary where you are safe amid chaos, to hold your center while everything around you dissolves. This inner ark is meditation, prayer, silence, and surrender. It is the sacred container of self-awareness that shields you from drowning in overwhelm. The Ark is also a threshold, a liminal space where you exist between the old world and the new, neither fully one nor the other, but both in potential. Psychologically, the Ark represents the threshold of transformation, the dark night of the soul, the limbo of transition, the pause before awakening. It is here that you are stripped of false identity and reconnected with the deeper source of life within. To build an ark is to build resilience, to carry forward what is essential, to remember who you are beneath the floodwaters of fear and confusion. Ancient myths tell of the ark resting upon a mountain after the waters recede, a symbol of emergence, grounding, and new beginnings. So too must we find our mountains after the flood, the places within ourselves where the waters of chaos give way to solid ground. The Ark is the promise that transformation is possible, that through the flood we do not perish, we are reborn. It holds the mystery of survival, not just physical survival, but survival of spirit, consciousness, and meaning. The Great Flood may have washed away civilizations, but the Ark ensured that the story did not end. It carried humanity forward through the storm into the dawn of a new age. And within each of us, there is an ark waiting, a vessel ready to hold us as we navigate the rising waters of change. To find it, We must quiet the noise, turn inward, and trust the journey. Because survival is not just about enduring, it is about transformation. And the Ark is the sacred space where this begins. The Great Flood does not only live in ancient tablets or sacred texts, it pulses in the collective unconscious, emerging in dreams, visions, and prophecies across time and culture. Dreamers have long reported visions of rising waters, vast oceans swallowing lands, rivers turning to blood, skies darkened by storms. These images are not merely random, they are symbolic echoes, messages from the deep well of human experience, a language spoken by the soul. In dreams, water often represents emotion, the subconscious, and transformation. A flood can symbolize overwhelming feelings, fear, grief, or renewal washing over the dreamer. But beyond personal symbolism, flood dreams carry a collective weight. They speak to the cycles of destruction and rebirth inherent in human history. Prophetic traditions across cultures have warned of great floods or cosmic cleansings, times when the world as we know it will be washed away, preparing the ground for new beginnings. The biblical book of Revelation describes the sky falling as a great scroll is unrolled, the seas boil and dry up, and the earth is remade. In the Hopi prophecies, floods will cleanse the land of corruption, ushering in a new world of harmony. Nostradamus and other seers spoke cryptically of waters rising as omens of transformation. These prophetic waters are not only physical, they are energetic waves sweeping through consciousness, challenging the old to dissolve. The flood in dreams and prophecy is a metaphor for the cleansing of the soul and society. It calls for surrender to change, letting go of attachment to the old, and embracing the unknown. Those who dream of floods often face deep personal transformation. The floodwaters in the psyche wash away barriers, open portals to new insight, and invite the dreamer to rebirth. Collectively, these visions urge humanity to prepare not just physically, but spiritually and mentally for profound shifts. They remind us that destruction is not the end, it is the threshold to awakening. Through the lens of dream and prophecy, the flood teaches us to trust the cycle of death and renewal, to see the waters not as enemies, but as sacred waters cleansing, healing, and renewing. The great flood myth, lived anew in dreams and visions, becomes a guide, a sacred map through the dark waters of change, leading us to the shores of a transformed world. The Great Flood is not just an ancient myth relegated to dusty scrolls and distant legends. It is a living story alive in our collective consciousness, resonating through the fabric of modern life. Today, the flood is not only water rising on the earth, but waves of change washing over our societies, technologies, and minds. We face ecological crises, political upheavals, cultural shifts, and spiritual awakenings. The old world, with its certainties and structures, is dissolving beneath us. The floodwaters of transformation lap at our feet. They demand surrender, adaptation, and courage. But what does it mean to live through the flood now? To navigate these waters without drowning in despair? First, it calls us to recognize the flood as a metaphor for transformation. Just as the ancient stories teach, destruction is not the end. It is the clearing away of what no longer serves, making space for new growth, new consciousness, new ways of being. The flood challenges us to embrace uncertainty, to relinquish control, to trust the currents of change. Second, it invites us to build our own ark, our inner sanctuary and resilience. This is the space within ourselves where we find stillness amid chaos, strength amid fear, and clarity amid confusion. The ark is not physical. It is the refuge of awareness, meditation, connection to higher truths, and grounding in the present moment. Third, the flood reminds us of our interconnectedness. Just as waters connect continents and peoples, our lives are intertwined in a vast web of relationships to each other, to the planet, to the cosmos. We are not isolated islands, but part of a flowing whole. Our actions ripple outward like waves. Our thoughts and intentions shape the tides. Finally, the flood calls for awakening to remember who we truly are beneath the stories we tell ourselves. To see beyond the illusions of separation and fear, to recognize the eternal self that persists through cycles of rise and fall. The flood myth, then, is both a warning and a hope. It warns of collapse and loss, but also promises renewal and rebirth. It teaches us that through surrender to the tides, we can emerge transformed, wiser, and more connected. As the floodwaters rise physically, mentally, spiritually, we are invited to journey through the waters, not as victims, but as conscious navigators. To let the flood wash away what is no longer needed, and to build the ark of our highest potential. The Great Flood was never just water. It wasn't a call to transformation, a story written in the depths of time, beckoning us to awaken, to evolve, and to rise anew.